Thanks for coming. We, as Max said, ran a Kickstarter campaign back in 2013, November. So it's actually been a year and a half almost now, and a lot's changed since then. So part of the talk tonight is kind of like more about the execution of onto the platform, which applies to any crowdfunding platform in my opinion. But bear in mind that things may have changed a little bit and that there's new strategies and new kind of approaches to take, I suppose. But yeah, so tonight's talk is about how to run a Kickstarter campaign, how to generate traffic, how to raise the money that you need, and hopefully, actually, I'll be running more of a Q&A type thing. So if at any point you have any questions or you want to throw in an opinion or something, just get your hand out and get that out. And then also, we'll be running this kind of, I'm hoping that the presentation part will be pretty short so we can get to questions as soon as possible, because that's more fun for everyone, rather than to listen to me drone on. All right, cool. So how to run a Kickass Kickstarter. First, I suppose everyone here knows what Kickstarter is, but in case you don't, it's a crowdfunding platform. More importantly, it's a marketing tool. It can be a validation tool if you're not sure where your product's going to fit or who it's going to sell to. And hopefully, it's a series of numbers that trend upwards, which, if you look at the numbers, is kind of reassuring. Total pledge to date is, what's that, 1.6 billion across Kickstarter. It's been running probably about 8 years. 82,000 successful projects, over 8 million backers, and the interesting stat is that it's got almost $200 average spend per backer. So your goal, if you're going to run a Kickstarter campaign, is really to access and generate backers out of random people on the internet. So tonight's talk is kind of about how to do that. And of course, Kickstarter is about these graphs. Now, this graph is our campaign. So if you search SwatchMate Cube in Kickstarter, you'll get access to it and have a look at it. And this is the back-end data that you get when you run a campaign. And of course, there's a lot more metrics involved. But on a high level, this basically shows against your total goal of 100%, which for us was 55,000 for Kickstarter, how are we tracking cumulatively to date? And essentially, Kickstarter is about growing that graph, and this talk is therefore about growing the graph. Because if you can't grow that graph, you can't complete your Kickstarter campaign. So it sounds fairly simple about how to grow that graph. It's about getting people to know about your project and then making those people backers. Unfortunately, it's not really that simple. There's a lot of complications and side steps along the way. So this talk is about strategies to achieve those two things. And essentially, as I said before, things may have changed and we could have done better ourselves. So take that as a kind of side note disclaimer before you kind of take everything I say as golden rule. But yeah, any questions about Kickstarter or crowdfunding before we get going? Nope, good. So it's always useful to envisage success, and on Kickstarter that means converting a random backer, a random person I should say, into a backer. And actually it means converting random people into backers, and as many of those as possible. Now the way we thought about it, and I think it's a useful mental model to keep in mind, is it's about converting people. And this mountain representation, it's a bit contrived, but really it's just showing that there's a bunch of reasons for people not to pledge a project, even if they find it interesting. So there's opportunities along the whole path of going from a random person on the internet or wherever, hearing about a project, into actually pledging money. And essentially, those reasons not to back a project become your challenges as a campaign manager to overcome. With a bunch of strategies and hopefully convert as many people as possible. So what are some of those challenges? The main one, of course, is the product. There's other challenges about being too risky and people having natural tendencies to not want to pledge hard-earned money for something that may never come around. There's risk involved in Kickstarter and crowdfunding platforms. Oh, and by the way, when I say Kickstarter, I am talking generally about crowdfunding platforms. We obviously ran an Indiegogo campaign as well, as Max said, right after our first Kickstarter campaign. So if there's questions about the differences on those platforms, I'm happy to go through them later. Some of the other challenges are about, you're an unproven team or your technology might be brand new, so people consider that to be a reason not to back. Your video might not be convincing or badly shot or whatever it might be. Your pricing structure and incentives and pledges might not be greatest either. And the big challenge is staying successful. So once you've got initial burst, how do you keep that momentum going? So the first challenge is around the product. And it's always useful to ask yourself, put yourself in the position of a random person on the internet or a potential backer and say, is this product for me? So this is kind of like a central question for anyone running a company in business, but especially true for Kickstarter, because your ability to grab someone's attention is very limited. So if you can find a product or if you can develop a product, and it could be music, it could be videos, it could be a tech product in our case, and you can answer that question in the definite, then you're in a much better position to know how to manage that campaign. If the answer to that question, is this product for me, consistently, and you keep asking this to as many people as you can, is no, well then of course you need to do some more work before you launch your campaign, and maybe isn't good enough, and that's just true for running companies in general and startups. And my kind of key here is that you never should launch a campaign unless you know that there's an audience for it, with the caveat that if you aren't sure and you've tried very hard to find out, Kickstarter could also be a very good tool to find out and test that assumption. So there's examples of projects, I think at this point now that's the second most funded project on Kickstarter, which is the coolest cooler. It's essentially just a giant fancy esky with a bunch of kind of integrated stuff. You've probably heard about it and watched the videos. So they raised $13 million. They ran a campaign first time round, raised something like, I don't know, 80,000 or something, didn't meet their goal, and then came back a few months later and redid another campaign and then raised the 13 million. So maybe they weren't sure, or didn't have the right copy, whatever it was, but they came back after testing it and understanding why it didn't work, and then smashed it essentially in a way that everyone can be enviable. So of course, if the answer to the question, is the product for me, is a definite yes, great, then you've got product market fit. Now, this was something we didn't know about when we ran our Kickstarter campaign, but intuitively it makes kind of sense. If you have a product and you can match it to a market, in the sense that you ask anyone within that market, hey, would you buy my product? And they say, yes, I see why it's worth the amount of money that you're asking for it. Then you've got product market fit, which is fantastic. It means it solves an explicit problem. Ideally, that means you also have a huge market to play with, so you can actually generate that initial interest and have it in front of people. The way to prove that is tricky, and as I said, you can use Kickstarter to do that, and I think we kind of did implicitly. We weren't necessarily sure that we had the right approach. But yeah, the way to test it is to get initial customers and get it out to do beta testing or whatever it might be. And hopefully those people are actually influential people. So as I'm going through this, I just want you all to keep in mind that everything is kind of interrelated with this stuff. So if you think about product and you think about how to test whether it works, get it tested by people who are really, really influential, so that when you then launch the product, they can speak about the process of how they helped you get it to the point where it's really good now, and they can then share it onto their people. So it's kind of not just about testing, it's about how can I maximize every single thing that I do for this campaign. And there's a point here about pattern matching, humans essentially being pattern matching animals. Now, what does that kind of mean? Well, Kickstarter is, as I said, inherently risky because some projects just never come around and people have to pledge well ahead of time. So the pattern matching part comes into it and says, okay, there's an Australian, and I'll use an example, there's an Australian startup called LifeX that made a light bulb that's connected to Wi-Fi. That's a mental model that all of us can understand. A light bulb, we know what it does. You add electronics or some smarts to it and it's suddenly better and it does all these things. So you kind of made that logical leap about it being possible and it being useful because you already know what a light bulb really is. And you see how technology is encroaching slowly into homes and whatnot. So as a pattern matching animal, we say, cool, that was something that I kind of expected to happen. And now somebody's doing it, they're just ahead of the curve. It makes total sense and you go for it. So if you have a product that's kind of not, I shouldn't say obvious, but is kind of can be applied to an existing mental model of behavior for normal people, amazing. We didn't. And to kind of quickly talk about what our product is, it's a color capturing device. So you can place it on these colorful chairs and it'll tell you the exact color of those chairs. So it's for creative individuals and designers, but no one really thinks about capturing color. You think about maybe sampling music like Shazam or whatever it is. But capturing color, we had to teach people how to think that way before we then convinced them that it was a useful thing to back. So we had the double challenge there. So if you can shortcut that and say, hey, my product is, again, not obvious, but is kind of inherently an existing pattern of behavior and then is better, amazing. It makes it so much easier to convert people up that mountain instead of having them drop off and be like, oh, I'm not sure, it's not really for me, and so on. So if you do have a product that people love, great. The next step is actually launching your campaign and getting prepared for it. And that essentially means generating as many eyeballs as you can onto the project. So the challenge number 2 is, hey, Kickstarter campaigns are risky. And although it is for me and it's a cool product, I'm just not confident that it's actually going to come around. And that could be just because there's no proven track record or whatever it might be. But there's 2 stages to this and how to tackle this that we kind of went about. The first one is the pre-launch phase, where essentially being successful is a precursor to being successful, which sounds really stupid. But because the product doesn't exist yet, if you can show that you've won awards, or that you're generally a domain expert, or that, I don't know, you've actually partnered with other people to determine that it's going to be good, then people can understand that, hey, these people are not just kind of coming out of the blue and asking me for money. They actually are previously successful, and hey, this is also obviously going to be successful, so you're kind of overcoming that inherent barrier. And I'll talk more in detail about that in a second. And then the other phase is around the launch, and it kind of bleeds on the same idea that people love backing a winner. So your job as a campaign runner is to become a winner as soon as possible, and preferably like instantly. And that's what I'll talk about, is what I call the domino effect. Cool, so before launching, be already successful. That sounds easy, right? But that's really, really hard before you've got a product actually out to market. I'll give you an example. We had a working prototype that we'd got into the accelerator program with. We'd gone out and tested it with a bunch of people, but it was still a big black box, made 3D printed essentially. And then we'd done one other pass to get it into a form factor. We thought, okay, this is possible. And we knew the general manufacturing process that was going to be involved. But we didn't have anything by way of existing success. This is our first company. We were just out of university, 2 years out essentially. We didn't have any initial media apart from having gotten into the program, so we're trying to leverage that as much as possible to get people to actually know about you and trust you. So your strategies around this kind of stuff is really to present yourself as successful as possible, which means generating media coverage. So whatever you can talk about, it could literally be the fact that, hey, we're just young people out of university and we're running a company. Great, just leverage that. It could be the fact that you're about to run a campaign. It's just anything that you can talk about to generate articles and get people to actually, journalists and reporters to actually write about is going to be a massive validation boost for you to make you appear as if you're more successful than you really are. Part of that as well is engaging with influential bloggers. This is something that I can't really overstate. When I talk about influential people, if you can get into networks that inherently want to support projects and want to kind of support, let's say they just want to promote products that can appeal to their target audience, then you stand a great chance of actually growing the amount of people that know about you. So engaging as soon as possible with influential individuals is really, really important. So that's, obviously quite hard, but it's something that you should work on immediately if you haven't yet and you plan to do a campaign. If you're lucky, you can win some awards beforehand. You don't need any kind of prior experience to have won awards. You can just apply for them and hopefully get through. And we were lucky, we got a few with Australian Design Awards and a few other ones, I think around university technology and that kind of stuff. And all that stuff's really good, if only just to have a little logo somewhere. Yeah, cool, we won something. We're real successful. And yeah, have previous wins to highlight. So, okay, Pebble Time just launched or just finished their second Kickstarter campaign. They start off their new video by saying, hey, you may remember us from our first campaign, which by the way was the most successful campaign for years. So it's always just trying to leverage the things that you've won in the past to make people believe that you will be successful again in the future. Cool. The next thing you need to do, once you've proven that you're successful, is to grow your community and make them feel like they have ownership. Now, that means friends and family, of course. That means growing your Facebook and your social media. I've seen people spend, $5 on Fiverr to get 5,000 backers on likes on Facebook. Now, all those things, anything you can do to inflate your numbers is great. There's the obvious trade-off where if people look at it a little bit deeper, they can find out that it's not true. We didn't do it. We kind of organically grew to, I think it was about 2,000 people, 2,000 likes on Facebook. Not huge, and it hasn't really grown much since then because we're just kind of like, whatever. But it's really important to get people to know about it. So your job is to engage the people who are immediately available, that's friends and family, grow a mailing list, and then when you launch, you can blast out an update to everyone on your mailing list. And by the time we launched, I think we had about 2,500 people on there. And I can talk about how that happened later on, because it was kind of lucky. And yeah, social media, of course. So the big mistake people make is to launch a crowdfunding campaign without having existing community behind them. So they essentially go to Kickstarter and say, cool, I'm going to launch on Kickstarter, and then people are going to find out about it. And that's just not going to happen. When you've got $1.6 billion worth of money being thrown about by backers, there's just a huge amount of pressure, huge amount of activity. And on the day that you launch, there's bound to be 10 other projects that are cooler and more exciting. So you will just get lost unless you can actually have people you've built up a community around. And that means making them feel like they own a part of the story. So that's like, in your Facebook, posting about getting ready for the campaign, posting some stories about the trials and tribulations as you went through prototype phase. It could be, yeah, as I said, working with bloggers and influencers who felt like they influenced you and helped you get to a better product. Anything you can give to give people a sense of ownership is going to be the thing that when you launch is going to drive them to back you and tell other people and spread the word. So give people ownership is really, really important. Don't be too protective about it, and get out in front of people as much as you can. And before I forget, it's really important to essentially, we weren't concerned about people copying the idea because it was most important just to get out and get it in front of as many people before we launched. Now, it so happened that a month before we launched, as we were waiting for Kickstarter Australia to launch, and it kept being delayed and delayed, a Canadian project came out which was very similar. That kind of happens. You just can't really plan for it. Your number one job is to get it out in front of as many people as possible, as early as possible, and just to ride it out. And if it's a good product and if it's a good market and you have product market fit, then you'll be fine in the long term. Cool, so you've got all your people activated, you've got a community you've built up, you've got a great product. The number one thing that you need to do for Kickstarter and any crowdfunding campaign is focus on the day one of launch. There's an incredible amount of writing and things you can read online about strategies to do this and how to do it. What we did, because there's only 3 of us, it was kind of limited in our scope, but we planned as many articles as we could with media partners to sync up with the day of launch. Now, because it was a brand new launch for Kickstarter in Australia generally, it was kind of hard to tie in when that exactly was going to happen. We just knew it was roughly within a 24-hour period. And the reason I've got a little star asterisk there and talk about SwatchMate's story was because we actually had a media partner post their article a whole day before we were actually meant to launch. Which were like, shit, like essentially that's going to be exposure with no referral, no call to action, nowhere to drive all that people reading it because the campaign's not ready yet. However, because that launched a day before, it cascaded into maybe like 10 or 15 blog posts and website articles, and we grew our mailing list overnight from, I think it was like 1,000, we doubled it to 2,500 in the space of just that one night. Our Twitter exploded. So it was really lucky that we did that giant kind of upheaval in our numbers. And then the next morning when we actually launched our campaign, we then shot it out to everyone else. So if anything, I actually think it's a really good strategy to pre-seed your campaign maybe a day or 2 before with a kind of low to medium scale announcement with some media partners, and then really try and tie in a big one for the day of launch. For us, that actually was just fortuitous that cascaded into an article with The Age and Sydney Morning Herald here in Australia the day of launch, which then generated, I think, 10,000 backers, $10,000 worth of backers within a couple of hours. So your ability to leverage the media and plan them is difficult because they're kind of an unruly beast and they're not beholden to your plans. But if you can give them, as I always keep talking about, a sense of ownership, and especially with bloggers, then you can actually partner with them very closely and say, hey, I'd like you to launch this at this particular time. And then they'll probably say, cool, yeah, because it makes sense. It's going to be a big new news story. And then they can drive a lot of traffic to their own site. And if it helps you in the long term, yeah, it's fine. Strategy number 2 for your day of launch is to set your goal for your crowdfunding total as low as possible. Now, this is really dangerous. If you set it too low, and that's all you get because that's how it works. You may just get what you ask for, and if it's a third of what you actually need, you'll then need to fulfill these pledges without having any money to do so. It's incredibly dangerous. It has happened. We weren't in that scenario, but what we did is essentially plan out how much it was going to cost us and then just lowball it, just absolute bare minimum, scrape through, and of course didn't include any wages for ourselves. Like I still think that's crazy when people talk about doing that. You need to set that goal as low as possible, because if you can smash it, and I mean, like, let's say you have a 100,000 goal and you did it in 24 hours, that's a news story. And that's going to excite other people to find out about it. It's going to excite Kickstarter, because Kickstarter also loves successful projects. They'll start promoting it on their platforms. So the sooner you can actually show that, yes, we were previously successful, and now we're actually successful because we smashed our goal, the cycle just repeats. It's just like a fortuitous circle. So set it as low as you can, but be very careful about doing that. And then, so the number one thing you then want to do, and this is a series of number ones, and I keep saying it's number one, and it's a series because it was just, this is lucky. This is how it happened for us. We had all of these things happen in a row without much by way of actual planning. We had theoretical concepts of what that could look like, and when it actually happens, it's amazing. It's kind of like the full focus of the internet is on your little thing that you've been slaving on for years, and it's great. But to do that, you have to get featured by the platform itself, and that's Kickstarter or Indiegogo, whoever it is. And as I said, they love success because success is how they get paid. They get 10% of every project that gets run. So the more they can promote already successful projects, the more they'll get paid. It's pretty simple. To do that, to get featured, you need to generate as much traffic as possible. And that's in general. You just need to be driving as many eyeballs as you possibly can onto the project. You then want to be converting as many of those people as possible, so generating as much cash as you can, and that means smashing through your goals and all that. And then generating follow-up media as much as possible. So you can start getting this fortuitous circle of, I've had a really good community of people that were ready for the project. I launched, and with media partners, it turns into a huge success. I fulfill my goal within 24 hours. Kickstarter then picks it up, other media then pick it up as a success story, it then bleeds onto other people coming in, and then they become more backers, and then it kind of keeps going. If you can actually generate that circle and keep the momentum, then you're in a fantastic position. We did it for about one loop, and then we just burnt out and just lost energy and lost the momentum, and I'll show you what that looks like later on. But yeah, there is a way to do it, and that is essentially just drive everything as much as possible and get featured. And I think by the end of it, we'd been like the staff pick, we'd been the daily project, we'd been all sorts of things on Kickstarter, and all those are really great to have, even if they're, again, just little badges. And as you've seen on every Kickstarter page, it's all about like how many other people's icons can I place on there, which gets a bit redundant, a bit silly. I don't know if that's changed much recently, if people kind of try and dial down on that a little bit. But if you've been featured by Wired, like, of course you're going to put it up there, like no question. So the next challenge is overcoming the idea that you're an unproven team or that your technology might never work. Part of this is about, is this a spam? Is this a fake project? And I won't go into that because that's kind of like there's no strategy to get around that. If you're running a spam project, then that's what's all ever going to be. So this is really about how to kind of overcome the challenges of an unproven team. It's really important to remember that you're asking strangers, randoms on the internet, to give you money for something that doesn't exist yet, and maybe never will. You've never built before, in most cases. Some of you may have, if you're lucky, and that's part of your success story. And also maybe months or many years away from actually being delivered. And of course, we know the stories on Kickstarter. I think Rocky's backed a few projects that are just 2 years late, like it just happens. People know that, and the more people that generate and have experience in Kickstarter, the more they're kind of reticent to put some money down against an unproven team. So, as always, your strategies are just to go through the media to validate yourself ahead of time, to say this actually exists. Hey, if you can get an influential reporter to say, hey, I've used it and it's great, fantastic, you can actually quote that, and that's an immediate validation. And yeah, empowering your community. So if you can if you can give people a sense of ownership, they'll defend you, they'll support you. If someone has a question or negative about something, they'll actually come in and say, hey, we've talked about it, we know, or this is something you haven't considered. And that's actually what's happened in a lot of cases for us. We've had, by all means, the best backer community you could have hoped for. But of course, you've got questions here and then about, hey, what's happening, what's going on? And then because we've been pretty good about updating people and keeping communication levels very open, you have people who kind of respond on our behalf. So you kind of have a self-managing community and a self-supporting community, which is really beneficial to let you focus on actually delivering the product. The next challenge is the video, right? Every Kickstarter campaign has to have a video. And I mean, without exception. A friend of mine recently ran one for a magazine, for a photography magazine that he put together, which was fine, but it was essentially just his mum and my mum and me and our friends, which is really nice. And his next one's going to be even bigger, but he didn't have a video. And that meant that he had no one apart from his immediate circle of people who wanted to support him. So, and just as an aside, the program that we're part of, MAP, also requires you to make videos if you want to enter into the Startup Accelerator. And it's funny how many people find that as like an off-putting thing, like it's going to be difficult, it's going to be strenuous, I have to put a lot of production values in. You really don't. It really doesn't have to be amazing. Of course, if you can spend $100,000 and get an amazing video done, great. But we did it in a week. We just called up some friends and said, hey, can we like shoot in your studios? And we got two of our friends to act in it. There's me, and I'll play it later on, there's me giving a high five, looking real corny. We recorded the audio with a sheet above the computer so it didn't like echo. So it can be really, really kind of ghetto, and they'll be fine. Then the goal, and the other thing to remember is that you have to capture people's imagination and attention really quickly. They're kind of blowing through Kickstarter. They've got so many things they want to see and back, and they're excited by it. If you don't get their attention, excitement very quickly, and I think there's a stat around this for advertising in general, but I'm just calling it 5 seconds. It may be 1 second, I don't know. And always finish with a call of action. Say, hey, now become a backer. Do that in a creative way, and we'll play our video later on. We did it with the silly poster thing. It's cute, maybe too cute. And yeah, the goal is that by the end of the video, they should have already backed. They should have already understood everything they need to know about why they should back this project. And keep it short, keep it like 1 minute, 1.5 minutes. I think ours was 1.5 minutes, and I was a bit pissed about that. Some projects go for 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and if they have more features, they just need more time. But start off with the expectation that it has to be really short and snappy, and then grow it. Yeah, I'm gonna just play our video real quick, just to give you a sense of how bad they can be, or how good, depending on what you think. It's 1:34, see, 4 seconds over, it's no good. Sometimes it's important to find the right color. At SwatchMate, we think color is amazing. So we started thinking, we love the colors that inspire us, so what if we could interact with them? We created the cube. Small, beautiful, and easy to use. Just place it on an object to record the color, and pair it with your phone to see the result. Color is everywhere. Inspiration is anywhere. And now you can bring real-world color into your favorite design software. Whatever you scan becomes your primary color, so you can get on with being great.
The cube contains a unique sphere. When light is shone on the surface, the sphere captures all reflected color information. This means you can capture the color of virtually anything. And best of all, it stores up to 20 colors even without your phone. Now it's easy to share inspiration.
They'd never met before this.
When the world is your canvas, what will you capture?
Hi, I'm Paul.
I'm George.
I'm Rocky.
And we're making the cube. We made the cube for creatives,
Designers.
And anyone who loves color. With your support, we can make this happen.
Thanks for watching.
And that was pointing at the Kickstarter green button, more or less in the right position. Yeah. Yes, Rowan. Yeah. Well, that video served us well, I would say. It cost us about $3,000 to make a week. And yeah, we also had the pressure of getting, Kickstarter Australia was launching. We didn't know when, so we kind of kept pushing off making the video until we actually had a firm date. And suddenly they're like, it's launching 2 weeks from now. And we're like, okay, cool, let's make the video. But of course, there used to be a review process you had to go through. I don't think that exists anymore. So we were suddenly looking at only having a week to put this thing together, and it was kind of like, oh, man, okay, let's get it done. And it turned out okay, despite everyone's misgivings. We ended up raising enough money out of it. But yeah, so they can be pretty low budget and you know, cute in places if they have to be. And really, videos can take up a whole talk about how to put it together. The best thing to do is just consume them, like just devour as many Kickstarter videos as you can. Just internalize the thinking, internalize the presentation, the beats, whatever it is. Just spend every day looking at least a few projects or videos, especially really successful ones, and then it'll start clicking. Like it will just be like, okay, this is what people expect. You can highlight a few things and then get going, but keep it short. All right, the next challenge is around pricing and incentives. You can run a great campaign, you can get a lot of traffic, you can get success from people who'd known about you before, but if your pricing isn't right, if you're asking for too much money and it's not generous and it's not whatever it is, you can lose a lot of people. So the idea is to price your pledges aggressively. Now everyone intuitively understands this. The cheaper it is, the more you'll in theory sell. The cheaper you make it, the more riskier it is for you. So it's a balance of offsetting the perceived risk by a potential backer who says, this has got something that I like, but it may never come. So if I spend $100, it's too much, but if it's 75, it's probably outweighs that risk. Versus your risk, if you price it at 75, that you just can't fulfill it. So that's a difficult balance, and we toed and froed on that for weeks, I think. We just couldn't nail it, couldn't settle on it. And it's in relation to the amount that you're also asking about. So you can kind of do some projections around, hey, I'm asking for $50,000 and it's $50 each, and that means this many backers. And yeah, it's a difficult, I don't really have a strategy around it. Just price as low as you can, but be really conservative about how you set that on your end. Because if you don't do it right, you won't be able to fulfill the pledges. Don't overcrowd your page with like 1,000 different pledge levels. It's just confusing. Really find a few that you can funnel people on. So if it's just like a casual observer, give them a $5 one, they can support the project. Maybe a t-shirt or a poster level is kind of what we did. And then the next one should be the actual product. And then, yeah, some people have like, you know, the $10,000 one, which is like go to dinner and meet the team. If you're successful, if you have actual previous success and people find that engaging, is a great way to do it. We were just 3 young guys. No one was going to pay $10,000 to have dinner with us. So, you know, there's just no need to overcomplicate things. And look at other projects that are similar to yours to see how they've solved that pricing riddle. It's like an optimal circle, kind of a Venn diagram, and you're trying to maximize that. Cool, okay, and then you've got your continue the narrative of the challenges and then being overcome. If you converted a bunch of people, you've got a great amount of success. The next question is how to stay successful, how to actually maintain your campaign. What I've put up here, and I'm going to use a really fancy laser pointer. This is what I call the double blip of Kickstarter, and it's true for every crowdfunding platform. You have an initial excitement phase where you've got everyone that you previously had in your community, there's articles being posted, it's a brand new project, you know, you raise a ton of cash. So we was almost 20,000 on our day 2, and something similar on day 3. And then nothing. Like essentially it's just like a giant chasm, a void. And for some reason, right at the end, you get like another blip, where maybe it's people who are following the project and just wanted to make sure that it was successful before they backed it, come back and say, hey, cool, it's actually well above its target, so let me actually contribute now. But this is something you'll see, and if you can, this is a really cool website, by the way. I don't know if I wrote it anywhere, but it's called KickTrack, which lets you monitor the statistics of your project and other projects and does projections, and it's really good to kind of analyze other successful projects to understand how they did it. And if you run this graph on any other project, literally any other project, you will get the same kind of double blip behavior. So your challenge as a creator is kind of saying, well, how do I overcome this period? You know, how do I balance the length of the project versus how much money I want to raise, versus if I run it too long, this just becomes 0 and I lose complete interest. So strategies to overcome the double blip. Don't be scared to run a really short campaign. If you're looking for $1,000, you can probably raise it in a week. Do it in a week, don't give it 60 days. It's just silly. You'd rather get on with actually making the product. And again, look at comparable campaigns to figure out what that campaign length should be. It turns out that 30 days is statistically the most successful length of a campaign, and I think that may have changed. I can probably dig up where I know that from. I think some mathematical students, Stanford or whatever, did some projections and figured it out. Keep updating. Now this is really important. A lot of people forget. They kind of like, and you can imagine, it's really easy. You've got all this effort you've put in getting a project started, getting people excited, letting everyone back you and pledge you and generating media attention, and then you launch and then you just burnt out. You're just kind of like, oh, like I've got nothing left to give. But you got to keep writing updates. You got to keep maintaining that communication high so that even in the first day, you know, but let's say at least on 24-hour mark, you say, cool, 24 hours, where are we at? Like, thank you all so much for backing me to date. And then you can, of course, use that as a way to call to action. It's like, hey, we can make this even more successful if we have more people join on. So updates are really, really important. And, you know, the best projects actually pre-plan all of their updates, or as many updates as they can. You know, and you can have a few different scenarios. So if it's like crazy much amount of money that you've raised in 24 hours, have a specific update for that. You can get pretty granular around it. We didn't do that. We just kind of kept consciously updating it whenever we had anything newsworthy to run about. And it could be a new news article, it could be X amount of backers achieved, but just invent reasons to update. Stretch goals. That was something that was raised before, and essentially stretch goals are a really great way to maintain momentum so that you can have people who have already backed the project incentivized to tell other people, so it's like a referral mechanism to unlock other goals and other features. So if you can lay out that stretch goal plan ahead of time, it's really useful. We went into the project and we're like, we should probably have stretch goals, and then a couple of days later we're like, we don't know what they're going to be, so we just did one and left the other ones hidden, essentially, like we weren't sure what they're going to be. And then as people unlocked one level, we'd reveal the next one. So it kind of gave us a few days buffer to figure out what the next feasible thing could be, because we just didn't have any more energy in us to figure them out before the launch. And because, as I mentioned, you know, the last week before we actually launched was a kind of an insane mess. A beautiful, insane mess, but. And then, yeah, don't burn yourself out. We really burnt ourselves out. And part of the reason this graph looks like this is because during that middle period, we were just out. Like, we just couldn't really bear to kind of contribute or put any more effort or think of any new strategies or talk to any more people about it, because we put everything into it, which is not the right approach. And a good solution could be to have, if you have multiple people in the team, tag team. So have somebody devoted to it for a few days, get somebody else, then somebody else, and so on and so forth. And if you pre-plan as much content as you can, that's even better. So the idea is, pretty straightforward. How to convert as many random people in the internet into backers and not lose them as they become backers, because there's always reasons to. So think about, and my list isn't exhaustive, so think about your own product and what some of the things people could be worried about, reasons that they might not back, and then develop strategies, put some thinking around it. It's gonna save you so much effort and time. And then generally, before we get to questions, engage in Kickstarter before launching. That means backing projects essentially, and as I said, consuming videos and really understanding the nitty-gritty of how a crowdfunding campaign works, why some of them fail, why do the update systems not work, why do backers get angry. It means backing projects so that you can also have a list of supported projects that you've backed, so people can see that you're not just kind of coming in cold and scamming the whole system to raise money for your own project. You've actually supported people as well, and that's really important. One strategy we used, and I don't think I've seen really often anywhere since, is this kind of immediate follow-up Indiegogo campaign. And you can probably correct me if it's more common now. The reason we did it was because we reached the end of our Kickstarter campaign and we're like, we should probably have a pre-order system set up now. How do we do that? Too difficult at the moment. Let's just do an Indiegogo campaign. And that was literally the thinking behind it. So we finished our Kickstarter and then immediately, like I think a day later, launched an Indiegogo campaign. And we weren't sure how it was going to be taken, if people were going to maybe think that was taking advantage of the crowdfunding, or if you tapped out the entire market for the first batch, for the first project, and no one was going to care for the second one. But it was actually really, really good. In the end, we had a completely different set of customers, a completely different dynamic. We raised another 50% on top of our total, so we got our total to somewhere around 150,000. So this is kind of Kickstarter's new template. It's a bit different. This is what people used to land on. We had a $5 reward for people who just wanted to back us. and we made it incentivized by having their names on the website. So now on the website we have like a giant list of all our backers to help just say thanks forever. Really, we're never going to take that down. We had a $25 tier for posters, so you could back. And this was kind of like for friends and family who didn't really want to actually spend too much money on the product, but you could get kind of like support us a little bit. So we had about 20 people, 16, who supported us on that, so we had to send out posters. The actual product tier was the $75 and onwards, which was the product, and it was an early bird, so it was a bit of a discount compared to everyone else, and we limited them to about 100. That's another strategy people use. Looking back at it, that's a ridiculous price point. But it's fine for just the product. But as a company looking back at it, you have to factor in distributor discounts and retail discounts and your margins and all this kind of stuff. But for Kickstarter, really, I think this is the right strategy. Just hit it to a point where it can fulfill your goal and nothing else. Like that's kind of like the strategy. Next up was 85, so that's for everyone else. So essentially these two are the same, just one of them is prioritized. We then had colorful cubes for 105, so a bit more money. And then if people wanted a black one, it was 125. So it wasn't overly complex. We leveraged the product in as many ways as we could to try and drive people up. People are a lot better about it than what we were, and that's part of the reason we didn't run the best campaign we could have. But it worked. Like we had, it was about 100 people here, and it generated somewhere, about 15 or 20% of our total, which is a nice kind of metric to say, yes, it was worth doing that.
Everyone, please join me